it's just repetitive. If one machine has it, there's probably going to be 100 machines that have it. And once we figure out how to fix that, if we can feed that into some type of AI system, it can reduce our diagnostic time drastically with a piece of equipment. We don't want you embarrassed if you don't use it. I want you embarrassed if you're not using it, because you're costing us time, you're costing us money. The only reason AI would ever replace you is if you are going to make the decision that I'm not going to adapt to AI.
By now, everybody should realize that implementing AI into any organization is going to be a team sport. It's not something that you can do by yourself. So how do you get started in that implementation process? Well, in broad terms, you need to have executive buy-in, and you need to have, as an HR leader, tight coordination with the IT organization. And the exact mechanics of how you actually pull that off is what we're going to cover in today's conversation, featuring Monte Erritt. So Monte, who's been with Vermeer Southeast Sales and Service, is the current Chief People Officer. Now, what's interesting about Monte's background is that he didn't come up through HR. He actually came through the sales and revenue organization. That gave him a unique perspective, and he's leveraged that perspective to drive Vermeer into the age of AI. As a people leader who's committed to coaching, team building, and cultivating strong leadership foundations, he values loyalty, integrity, consistency, intentionality, and excellence in all of his endeavors. And he strives to inspire others to contribute to a work environment that prioritizes collaboration and development. In today's conversation, you'll get a feel for how that shows up when Monte and his team started implementing AI and how that's going to take shape over the next few years. Monte, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, it's going to be a fun conversation, and I'm particularly interested in digging into this because you're at a very early stage of getting started with AI within your organization. So it's going to be a good conversation for those folks who are listening and don't know where to start. And once they get started, okay, what's the path forward, getting momentum? So looking forward to that. But before we dive into that, I think it's important for us to get a little bit better picture of not only your background, but also the lay of the land for Vermeer. So why don't you walk us through that first?
Yeah, so as far as the company goes, the company's Vermeer Southeast. We're the Vermeer equipment dealer in the Southeast, which would be Georgia, Florida, and Alabama. We have 12 locations throughout those 3 states. We handle the Vermeer construction equipment, so the part, service, and sales for that. And that industry really is your utility industry. We really serve the markets that put in all your utilities underground, your water, gas, sewer. So our equipment puts that in, and also the equipment that clears the land for that. So you got to get rid of the trees and so forth. So our equipment does that. And then we have a few other products as well, like with the solar fields. It's big. And we serve what I would call our mothership. So Vermeer Corporation is based out of Pella, Iowa, and they've been around since 1948. And so we are the exclusive dealer for the Vermeer construction equipment in those 3 states. As far as for me, I guess I started in the sales world, sold for several years, sales management, worked my way through regional manager, director of sales training, and so forth. And to where I am today, and currently exist as the chief people officer for our 12 locations and our 330-ish people.
So there's a couple of questions that I have on that. So considering that the space that you're in from an employee landscape perspective, what's the split between salaried white collar employees versus hourly blue collar employees? How does that break down within your organization?
Yeah, we're a little unique, and we are such a frontline face company. In other words, our sales managers, even us, sometimes we are out on the job sites. We are I'd say almost exclusively blue collar to some degree. I totally get your question, but it's a little bit different in that respect. As far as the split, I would probably say, you probably right at about a half are probably going to be like parts and service. So that's really frontline serving our customers. Probably a little more than that, probably around 200 plus. And then you have some regional managers in there, some sales managers in there, and then of course, exec team and so forth. Service and parts is really a big piece of our organization though.
So would it be safe to say that if you look at the entire employee population, there isn't really anybody that's purely strategic? Everybody has at least a little component that's customer facing?
Now, if you get to the C-suite, I would say we do still go see the customer a few times a year to stay close to the front line. But yeah, on a day-to-day basis, we're at that point, our VPs and C-suites probably not very customer focusing. But once you get below that, They're very customer focused and in front of customers on a pretty consistent basis.
The other thing that was interesting about what you described was how you grew up in the company in the sales side, and now you're in a like HR adjacent role. What's the story behind that?
Yeah, probably 5, 6 years ago, we were really starting to see this shift in HR. HR, as everybody knows that's listening to this podcast, especially, very used to be very compliance driven, benefits packages and so forth. And I would say 5, 6 years ago, I had a talk with as a regional manager, and I had to just talk with our CEO and said, "Hey, I really see this shift starting to happen. You got this HR role starting to shift into really this people side and employee engagement and retention." The reality was at that point, it was really getting hard for us to find people. And so if we can't find them, then we have to keep who we have. And not that our turnover was bad, but it was higher than what we wanted it to be. And so through my whole career, I've always really been involved with training and leadership and development. And so he asked me, he's like, "Okay, I see where that's headed as well. Would you be interested in moving over from your regional manager role since you understand the business?" And that's often one times the challenge on the HR side is, hey, understanding the HR side, but also understanding the business and how it runs. And since I had that piece of it, he said, "Would you consider going into our VP of employee development role?" And so really middle management. And a big piece of that is because we put these people in leadership positions and then we wonder why they're not being successful. And the reality is because we gave them no training or development for that position. And so we wanted to stop that trend. And so we put a lot of focus on that. That was my focus for probably 4 years. And then last year in June, he asked me if I'd consider taking on the chief people officer role, which really means I'm just overseeing HR. We have an amazing director of HR. She's great. And so she really helps me, complements me very well there. And she runs that compliance side. I run the people side, if you will, and the leadership development, engagement, and retention side of the business. I guess it's influence. And at the end of the day, through my sales career, I'm able to take that influence and just slide it over into leadership and how we train and develop our leadership, and really culture is a big piece of, I think, most companies, but ours as well, and protecting that culture and training our leaders how to do that.
So, what I find interesting about what you just described is you're getting into areas that are like my wheelhouse. So, I'm a retention and turnover guy. That's what my doctoral research is in. And I speak, write, and create content a lot of times about the challenges that first line managers face or first time managers face when they step into those roles.
Yeah.
What's interesting about your answer is that you didn't have a massive turnover issue as you described. So it's hard to get the C-suite to buy into long-term retention plays when something isn't burning down. So tell me a little bit more about how you talked through the shift in perspective and the transformation that was necessary to go from compliance oriented to retention and people centric as a strategy. What was the story there? Because sometimes, especially on the CFO side, they're going to look at you sideways and say, "This is all fluff.
Yeah.
Focus on this compliance stuff that'll keep us from getting sued."
It's probably a couple fold. One, our exec team is unique. We have all been in the business roughly 25 plus years together. So I think the least amount of time is 25 years on our exec team. And so the CEO being, both him and I started within about 2 months of each other. So to start, there's just strong alignment with where we see the company, how we need to run things. Also strong alignment in the importance of leadership training, leadership development, personal growth assessments, and so forth. So it wasn't a hard convince. Scott Coley's our CEO. He was already looking at that path as well. So again, high level of trust there. And this also goes back to what I talked about. We're pretty close to the front line as far as really knowing what's working and what's not. And the one thing that we really both 100% agreed on is where we do have turnover was generally in our technicians, so our mechanics that are fixing the equipment. That is also the place that you can't find. Mechanics are getting harder and harder to find. So now you double that challenge. And then the other reality was generally service managers. And if you buy into the whole 70% of the reason somebody stays or goes is because of their direct supervisor, the challenge with that is our service managers oversaw the technicians. So those service managers had the least amount of training and development with leadership, because generally service managers historically just got there because they were good at turning wrenches, which has zero correlation to leadership. And so looked at that and really said, hey, if we're going to stop the retention with all of our employees are important, but technicians are like gold, especially if they're good, because you cannot find them. We have to dive into training and developing our leaders, our service managers before they get in that seat to minimize that turnover. And if we don't do something different, because we've known this for years and we've done nothing about it because of time and resources, and we just realized both together that, hey, if we don't focus on this, it's not going to happen. And so that's when he said, hey, would you mind focusing on that then? And I said, absolutely. So that's how it came about.
Got it. So we've gone around this little side road and we're talking about retention and turnover, but this isn't a retention and turnover show. It's more about an AI show. But here's where it gets interesting. You're an organization that generally I wouldn't immediately think, oh, this is going to be an organization that's even paying attention to AI. So tell me a little bit about how AI came into the view of your organization and what started that conversation.
Yeah, I would say what started it, I'll start with what started and what gave it some traction. What started it really was probably similar to everybody else. We'd heard about this thing, somebody gave it a shot on a job description, and all of a sudden people are saying, wow, you can knock out a job description, which is one of the most mundane tasks there is, in about 10 seconds versus an hour. And so we started playing around with that. We started using, of course, the coaching Copilot with emails and how to generate those and partner with you. So that's probably what got it started. But what really gave it traction was last October-ish, coming up on the year end. I started thinking about, hey, I guess coming from a strategic background with sales and so forth, I always try to think, hey, what could the competitors do that would maybe concern me? If they started doing this, what would really concern me? If they mastered it, it would maybe leave us in the dust a little bit. And for whatever reason, that weekend, and I really wasn't sure what that answer was yet, but over Thanksgiving, I read this book called The AI Driven Leader. And after I read that book, I was thoroughly convinced that is what could happen. If our competitors really started doing that really well and we didn't, to me, I felt that was something that could possibly leave us in the dust a little bit. And so read that book, started thinking about that, and really from there started talking to again our leadership team and so forth about, hey, this is what 2026 needs to look like for us. And this is the area we really need to gain some key traction in next year. So that's kind of how we got where we're at now anyway.
So I would dig into a couple of things that you mentioned. You started using Copilot to assist with some of the emails, but the thing that caught my attention was how you leverage AI to streamline your job description process. And if we think about it in general terms, that makes sense. But there's a lot of setup behind the scenes in terms of what's the language that you use in job descriptions? How does it need to line up with your job families? Tell me a little bit about how you covered those bases so that you weren't getting just like generic stuff that was not relevant to the roles that your organization has.
I don't know if we did it on purpose or not, but it was very ad hoc-ish, if you will. Everybody was just experimenting, doing their own things, but we really just started with what we had. So I would say for the most part, I don't know how many we created from scratch. I think a lot of it we took for what we had with existing. We stuck that into Copilot and just said, hey, make this better, shorten this, and so forth. As we continue to learn how to use it better, I think we got better at getting more efficient at using that. But we did start a few probably from scratch, but I think that was that's why we had the consistency, is we took what we already had, put it in there, and just asked Copilot to really make it better.
Got it. So you used your legacy information to establish a library and then asked the Copilot to like refine based on whatever prompts you use. The second part that caught my attention was your conversation about reading AI driven leader and thinking about a competitive analysis of what would worry me if this happened in the marketplace from our competition. I get reading a book. I get doing competitive analysis. What I don't get is that when I think about companies in your space, I still don't imagine them being an AI innovator. So when you think about what are the areas within your type of business that could be innovated using AI, what were some of the things that came to mind that signal to you, hey, if we don't act on this first, we're going to be behind?
I'd say probably a couple ones really sparked me. One is I talked about our technicians and the challenge with getting experienced technicians. And we started realizing a lot of these things are common fixes. Once there's a certain number of issues with the machine that are out there, it's just repetitive. If one machine has it, there's probably going to be 100 machines that have it. And once we figure out how to fix that, if we can feed that into some type of AI system, it can reduce our diagnostic time drastically with a piece of equipment. So that was the first thing we started thinking on. A second thing that really started to get me thinking is a lot of these companies that approach me specifically really on leadership training and development, and they want you to team with them and so forth. One of the things that they had talked about was, hey, we're working on this coaching co-pilot that you take everybody's assessments, you download them, and then when you ask questions of how to coach them or lead them, that it can just spit out an answer based off all their assessments and so forth. And which caused me then to go, hey, we've got an amazing director of IT. Why can't we do something like that? That seems like something we could probably do internally. And when I reached out to our director of IT, and he said, "It's funny you asked that." I was like, "I've already been working on something with basically all of our assessments, utilizing all the material that you use for coaching, growing, and training our leaders in our company." And so he's already experimenting with something that it would ask questions around employees or employee issues, and then giving consistent feedback. So again, if it's just me giving feedback, of course it's consistent, but with 50 some supervisors, how do you get consistent? And so we're thinking of, hey, how do they type that in? Give kind of consistent feedback around how Vermeer Southeast would want you to answer that based off stuff I've trained on. So those were just some big ones. And then it just started rabbit trailing into all sorts of different things, not just HR, but in our parts department, our service department. And we just, from the AI driven leader book, it really, I think what stuck out to me is it just talked about how few people are actually using this right now, and how you should every single day be thinking about, how can AI help me with this? And so it really just started grabbing feet as we used best practices and shared them and so forth. And yeah, I think I don't know if that answers the question fully, but that's where we're at.
It does. And I want to dig in a little bit deeper into those areas. I think the TLDR of what you just described is you're using this as a leadership development tool by integrating all of your assessments, your coaching, training elements, and also the language that's internal to your organization to provide an on-demand coach. So if I'm getting that correctly, walk me through a little bit of the lift that was involved in compiling all of that so it's to the point where it's usable.
Yeah, I never really thought of it from that perspective, but thank goodness my role started 5 years ago, because most of that assessments and everything that we've been building has been actually the past 5 years worth of material. Had I not had the VP of employee development role, we wouldn't have any of this. We started assessments 5 years ago. You certainly can't get all of your employees assessments overnight. And we just slowly but surely took some of the key assessments out there, started putting those in. We started adding in some of the leadership and training development material that I've developed, obviously, over those 4 and 5 years. And with it all being in Copilot within our framework of our company, our IT guy was able to just take all that stuff, start downloading it into one area. And so it knows to answer things based off of that input. And so you're certainly not there yet. He's playing with it with the chat bot and so forth. But without all those 4 or 5 years worth of material, we wouldn't be anywhere with that right now, except for an idea. So.
Got it. So I think one of the things that I draw from that is one of the foundational steps in building anything to solve a problem like this is to gather as much of the legacy documentation that you have that gives the proper context for whatever bot that you want to build. The other thing that I'm curious about is what motivated you or prompted you to bring IT into the conversation as you're working through the build out of this?
I don't know that I would have a few years ago. Our director of IT he's incredible. We have a branch off company called Light Hill Solutions. They hire us to come in and do all of their IT work, basically everything behind the laptop. Anything once it passes that laptop, that's what they do. He's president of that company, but he's our Vermeer Southeast director of IT. And so when I saw what these other companies were proposing to us, I know I'm not smart enough to do all that by any means. And so I was like, but I don't see why Nick couldn't do this. And obviously when I reached out to him, he, like I said, he was already laughing, saying, yeah, I've already been playing with that behind the scenes. So that's really what sparked me. I knew we had someone capable of doing that.
So one of the things I find interesting is that you're starting to build collaborators early. And right now you have you who's read the book and thought about competitive analysis. Now you're bringing your IT leader into the conversation, but it's going to take a lot more than just two to get momentum. So what was the process that you went through to get not only your executive team, but buy-in from your leadership layer underneath you? Because without both of those, you're not going to get anywhere. So walk us through how you managed to do that.
Yeah, so I think that the timing of it was good because we were coming up on year end anyway. And so as I was evaluating that, one of the things I sat down with our CEO, as everybody knows, if you don't have the CEO on board, you're probably not going to get a lot of traction. So the CEO and the COO, us three sat down and I was just talking to them about, hey, I really think as far as key initiatives for 2026, this has got to be one of the key ones. This is taking off and we're going to get left behind if we don't gain some traction here. Those two both bought into it completely. From there, obviously, you still got to get your team involved. We call it our core team. It's every direct supervisor in our company, and we meet once a month virtually to just keep alignment and talk about things like this. And so we rolled out to them really the importance of where we see this AI thing going and how we need to get on board for 2026. And I talked to them about the book that we were going to go through. It's going to be a required read for them as well. And they bought into that. And then really it just came down to two other really key things. One is celebrating the small wins. So we really spent that time, hey, let's make sure we are sharing those best practices, sharing those ones as we get them. And that allowed us to really create this culture of, I guess the way I would look at it is there's still a lot of people out there that aren't sure if they're supposed to use AI. Can I use Copilot? Can I use ChatGPT? Is that the right thing to do? And I compare it to back in the day when these dating apps, people were embarrassed to say they met through dating apps. And now in today's world, they're like, why would you not use a dating app? It's way quicker, way faster. And so we're trying to drive that culture within our organization to all of our employees that, hey, you shouldn't be embarrassed if you do use Copilot or AI. You should be embarrassed if you're not using it because it's costing us money, time, and efficiency if you're not. So please use it and probably use it daily. And I believe we're really getting that culture driven throughout the organization. And that's what's really allowed us to start gaining some momentum with this as we head into 2026.
This has been a fantastic conversation so far. If you haven't already done so, make sure to join our community. We're building a network of the most forward-thinking HR and people operations professionals who are defining the future. I will personally be sharing news and ideas around how we can all thrive in the age of AI. You can find it at gocleary.com/Cleary-community. Now back to the show.
So what's interesting about what you described is a change management piece that happens at the frontline level. So when I think about an organization like yours, I'm thinking more of a skilled trade organization than like a white collar traditional office organization. So I'm wondering how you connected the dots to like that frontline manager or the maintenance supervisor or the service supervisor in getting them to use it and be more effective with it, because that's where it'll break down. You might have it at the executive level, maybe even at the director level, you get strong buy-in, but if it doesn't stick at the front lines, it's going to fall over. So how did you actually work this down to build that culture of utilization at the front lines?
Yeah, I think it probably seems oversimplified, but I think it really came down to that ability to share the best practices. And we really made sure that we were, after our core meeting, we shared those best practices. We said, hey, now let's make sure we go back to our employees and show them how much time we saved with this diagnosis, how much time we saved with this job description, how much money we saved by before we went to our lawyer with a question from anything really, that we at least ran it through an AI system to narrow it down. I know we can't take everything but by the time we went to the lawyer, it saved her 30 minutes. So that saved us money. So one of our other key objectives for 2026 is just cost leadership and having a mindset of cost awareness. And so it all tied in well together with that. But I think the more we shared that, we did an internal podcast as well. That way it came from myself and actually our director of IT to the team. So the message was delivered in a very consistent way to all 300 and some employees versus relying on 50 different supervisors delivered to 50 different messages. So I think just that consistency of message and the best practice sharing is what really gained some excitement, I think, around it.
Tell me a little bit more about the internal podcast as a communication channel for getting traction and buy-in to this initiative. How did that get pieced together and rolled out?
Yeah, so probably 5 years ago, that was something I've been a huge podcast listener. And so I'm not even close to where you're at as far as how many you've done, but we started about 5 years ago. Hey, how can we deliver a consistent message to 300 employees versus me giving a message to 50 supervisors and then that message gets delivered, who knows how, to the rest of our employees? I said, how do we so we know it's consistent, we know it's our voice. So we started an internal podcast back then, and we've been using that ever since to deliver key messages like this. Hey, how do we use AI? What is AI? Just driving culture through our organization as well. creating common language through our organization. And that podcast has really been impactful for us. And yeah, so we have that. And then I do another one just for fun as well, just from leadership stuff that we talk on. But so yeah, that's how we use them.
So far as we've been talking through this, it's been, what are the building blocks that have been put into place to establish a foundation to jump off from? What did the actual jump off process look like? How did you move this from planning to execution?
I think the first staple of that really to create some momentum, the AI Driven Leader book is a required read for all 50 of our supervisors. So we're going through that together. That brings us back every month to discuss the key takeaways from that chapter, but also what have you done in the past 30 days that AI has helped you with? And I think that the thought we're trying to drive through all of our employees, because a lot of times people get worried about AI. They think it's going to replace their jobs. They're going to be gone. And I think we've done a good job of getting them to see, hey, AI is a thought partner, and which comes directly out of that book. That's nothing from me. It's think of it as a thought partner and think of it as something you should be using every day. You should be asking that question every single day. And the only reason AI would ever replace you is if you are going to make the decision that I'm not going to adapt to AI. And if you make that decision, then yes, AI might replace you. But outside of that, it's no different than back when email came out and anything like that. The web, the internet, when people were going, I'm not going to use the internet, I'll just mail a letter. I'm not going to use email or whatever. Well, you can do that, but you would not still be around if you wouldn't have adapted. And AI is going to be no different. You have to learn how to adapt and utilize it because it's coming whether you want it to or not.
You mentioned something that I found interesting, which is you still had a sentiment within the organization where people were thinking AI is going to replace my job. Considering the amount of messaging or amount of investment that you've put into messaging, how did you tackle that particular objection, because that particular complaint or point of view within the organization to get people to think about this in the right way?
I think we just use history. If you go back to history on any of those things we just talked about, it was the internet. They thought the same thing. Wow, this is gonna replace. They're not gonna need me to look up this information. They're not gonna need the 5 people to go research an encyclopedia to go find this answer. We're just going to get on the internet. That's going to replace me. I think was able to get. If we use history, we can see that all through history, technology. That's what people have been worried about. Technology is going to replace me. Technology is going to replace me. And all through history, technology hasn't replaced you if you've adapted. Yes, we've had people sales reps that wouldn't adapt to a laptop back in the day. I've done this for 30 years, so I've seen all this transition, and they wouldn't adapt to a laptop and they wanted to turn in handwritten call reports, right? If they wouldn't adapt, and we did have a couple, and we had to part ways because it no longer would sync with our system. We just couldn't do that. Very few people sit in that category, but you could. And I think this is no different. If they really want to stick a stake in the ground and say, nope, not going to do it, it's going to pass them by whether they're at our company or whether they're at any company. And so I think our team has just embraced that because they've seen that. We have a lot of tenured people that work here. We try to invest into them, and that's where that podcast comes in too. But this is the message. Here's a consistent message. And if they're 25 years old and haven't seen a lot of this, then our job is to show them how history repeats itself, and it's no different than what the internet is.
I like that. The historical context is important. And when you're talking through it, it reminded me of one of my very first real jobs that I had was selling the Yellow Page ads. And part of the Yellow Page ad bundle that we had for the company that I was selling for was a website companion. And I had all sorts of people that I was selling to. I was like, what do I need that for? That internet thing is never going to take off.
Yep.
It's a flash in the pan. And you think about all the companies that were now built where the old way was you need a brick and mortar location to be successful. And now you have all sorts of companies that don't have like physical headquarters anywhere. Yeah. You have web page and an e-commerce bolt on, and they're billion-dollar companies. Yep. So it's an interesting perspective. So you've gotten started on it, but I want you to hit rewind and think through this entire process and think about what could you have done differently, or what would you have done differently if you had an opportunity to go through this initial transformation phase again. What were some of the roadblocks that you ran into that taught you, hey, the next go around, I need to switch gears in this way?
Okay, that's a great question. The one that sticks out, and there's probably several, but the one that really probably sticks out is we probably didn't train early enough on the difference between, say, Chat GPT. So if I was talking to new companies out there just starting to dive into this, they really need to understand the difference between Chat GPT and like Copilot, and where is it safe to put information and where do you not want to put information. And we did have some stuff get put in Chat GPT where it was like, well, no, you can't, don't put that back in there. And it wasn't overly sensitive, overly confidential, anything like that. But it was stuff we didn't really want out there on the open market, if you will. And you don't realize people don't know that. Like they don't know the difference between Chat GPT and Copilot. A lot of people right now might listen to this and still not know. You will have employees that like, I have no clue what even Chat GPT is. I don't know what Copilot is. That's where we weren't there that long ago. And so I think that part could be really dangerous if you didn't understand that and where to put that. And also understand the benefit of when to use your internal Copilot versus your web Copilot. Because we didn't really educate well on that initially because I guess we just didn't think that people wouldn't know that. And you got to remember too, IT really drove our training. And it's like anything, when you know something so well, you forget what the person that's just starting doesn't know. So you sometimes train at a 30,000 foot level and they need a 1,000 foot level. And so if you were coming up with some training, I would say make sure you realize that whoever's leading your training probably forgot what they didn't know when we were there getting started in this. That's probably the main thing. I feel we've done a pretty good job here because we didn't jump into it. It was a crawl, walk, run. And we realized we're not going to master this tomorrow, but we want to slowly but surely just start using some different things and see how it goes.
So when I hear you say that, it almost sounds like if you had a chance to do it over again, you would establish the guardrails first and the compliance side of it first, the rules of the road before actually jumping into it. Am I on track there?
Yeah, that's probably that. Yes, that would be a great way to do this. And we sorted it from a 30,000, but we did not get that to our team before we started telling them to start trying this stuff out. So that would be a good lesson.
Got it. So I want to zoom back out. Like one of the big things that you wanted to solve when you embarked on this was get your line level managers better equipped to be leaders and managers. You started developing tooling to help on that front. And you wanted to also drive broader overall AI adoption within the organization in a number of different ways. I want you to look out 12 to 18 months from now. You've laid the foundation, the initiative's been rolled out, you've gotten traction. What does success look like when it comes to this particular initiative, when it comes to AI being integrated into the organization?
I think you got a couple. I think if you're 12 to 18 months from now, it's every single person within the organization utilizing AI in some way, shape, or form on a daily basis. I think it is utilizing it for some of those tools that we talked about is, hey, how are we going to AI first as a thought partner to think of, hey, what would potentially be the diagnosis for this piece of equipment? Hey, are we going to AI first to go, hey, we need to rewrite some things in our employee manual. Let's have AI clean it up before the lawyer signs off on it. Because those are real dollars that you're putting to the bottom line. So now your CFO is happy as well. They're seeing those things happen. Hey, with say leadership, one of the most difficult things we train on is how to have maybe difficult conversations or coaching conversations with employees. Hey, I'm having a tough conversation with Jim next week regarding these topics based off their assessments. How would you go about that? That's really where we want to go. That everybody would be trained up to how to use and when to use our Copilot model. And that's just an everyday thing. It'd almost be like saying, did you use email today? Yes, every single day, just about. It would be the same thing. How did you use AI today? Oh, blah, 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 blah. And it'd just be common occurrence every day. And some better guardrails, probably going back to your lesson, we still need to probably get better there too and get those guardrails and rules around what to do and what not to do published.
Great stuff. If people want to continue the conversation with you, and I'm sure you'll get a lot of interest, especially from companies that are similar to the space that you operate in, what's the best way for them to get in touch with you?
The easiest way is probably DM me through LinkedIn. I try to stay pretty active on there. It's Monte Erritt, Monte, and last name Erritt.
I appreciate you hanging out with us, Monte, and talking us through how you're actually rolling out AI in a space where many people wouldn't even think that this would be something that would be on the radar of an organization like yours. When I think back to this conversation, I think there's a few things when you're thinking about getting started on an AI initiative and rolling it out, there's a few things that people need to pay attention to. I think one of the first things that you need to get aligned on is, what's the communication plan going to be? What are you going to tackle? What's the vision for the problem that this is going to solve? And then how are you going to provide unified messaging to your organization so that there isn't any confusion about what we're actually doing? And what's really unique about what you did or how you did it is that you had an internal podcast that you launched to help just get more effective communication across all sorts of initiatives, but this one in particular. And the lesson there is that for you to get traction on any initiative, and for you to get any sort of traction on an initiative, you need to be able to scale it. You can't rely on one-to-one communication or one-to-many one-to-one communication happening at all layers of the organization.
Yeah.
There needs to be a consistent message that's unified and it's filtered in the same way across all layers of the organization. And that consistency is what's going to build momentum. So clarity of communication, consistency of messaging is what's going to allow you to get traction and scale that initiative. And I really like how you leverage that piece, that internal podcast, as a way to get traction in the AI initiative. One thing that I'll be curious to find out is, a year from now, 18 months from now, what does the organization look like once this has gotten traction? And what's the next thing going to look like that incorporates AI?
Yeah.
So I appreciate you hanging out with us and sharing your thoughts across the initiative. And I'm sure that a lot of our listeners are going to find value in it. For those of you who've been listening to this conversation, we appreciate you hanging out. If you like the discussion, make sure you leave us a 5-star review on your favorite podcast player. And then tune in next time, where we'll have another leader hanging out and sharing with us their experiences on how they're using AI to future-proof HR.
Hey, it's Thomas again. One quick question before you go. Are you and your HR team tired of answering the same employee questions again and again in Slack? If yes, our Cleary AI-powered Slack bot is here to help. It takes routine employee requests and answers it automatically while freeing up time for you to take on more important tasks. At the same time, it automatically builds up an HR knowledge base as you go. It's quick to set up, works right in Slack, and you can try it for free. Just head on over to gocleary.com/HR-chatbot to install it. It's, again, gocleary.com/HR-chatbot. Thanks again.